Recording now. All right, we're good to go. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Amy and I am the Community Partnerships Manager at Girl Scouts of Colorado. And I'm the lucky person that gets to work on our Meet an Expert series. I see some familiar names and faces in our participant list today. So it's great to have everyone with us. A few housekeeping items. So we will be keeping everyone on mute for the duration of our session today. The chat box is available if you have any questions or technical issues. The chat box is closed except for to myself only right now. And then we will open it up a little bit later for our live Q&A. As mentioned, we are recording today's session and we will post it to our Meet an Expert playlist on YouTube so that anyone can listen in the future. Our recording is just of our speakers today so that there won't be any girls' faces being recorded. And before I turn things over to Stephanie Donner and Amber McReynolds, we will kick things off with our Girl Scout promise and law. And to lead us through our promise and law is our CEO, Leanna Clark. Welcome, Leanna.
Thank you. Hi, girls. It's so good to see you, Girl Scouts. No need, you don't need to turn on your camera, but if you're able to, I know that for me, and I think for our guests, it's really special to see your faces. So if you're able to, even for a minute, I think that would be an extra special treat for us. So we would appreciate it. Thank you. That's awesome. So before I do the promise and the law, I do want to say that both Amber and Stephanie, our guests today, were Girl Scouts as girls. So you can think of these women as something to aspire to. And hopefully, I know that they will give you a lot of food for thought and some really great information. So I'm so proud to have some fellow Girl Scouts with us as well. So let's go ahead and turn to the promise and law. So girls at home, say this along with me. On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law. I will do my best to be honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong, and responsible for what I say and do, and to respect myself and others, respect authority, use resources wisely, make the world a better place, and be a sister to every Girl Scout. Thanks, girls.
All right, I'm so pleased to welcome Stephanie Donner and Amber McReynolds, who are the authors of the book When Women Vote. Both these amazing women are going to tell us a little bit about themselves, their background experience, education, and then we're going to get to turn things over into a live Q&A. So save your questions while they're speaking, save them until we're open for our Q&A, and then get your questions ready to enter into the chat box. So I will turn things over to them now.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Leanna. That was really special to hear the pledge and all of that. It's been quite some time. So thanks for leading us through that. So Amber, you have to take yourself off mute. There she is. Amber and I wrote this little book called When Women Vote. And we'll tell you a little bit about more what that's about. But I guess, Amber, why don't you go first and tell us who you are?
Well, hi everyone. It's so great to see all of you, and it's been a long time since I did the pledge, so it was really nice to hear that again. Like Leanna said, I was also a Girl Scout. In fact, I think it actually was the first kind of girls club that I was involved in, besides my classes at school and dance class. This was sort of the first girls club and group of girls that I was engaged with as a young person. So just really big fan of the Girl Scouts, and it's lovely to be here tonight. I'm currently the CEO of the National Vote at Home Institute, and we're a national nonpartisan nonprofit, and our goal is to make it easier for everyone in the country to vote. And our work has become more important this year because we really focus on trying to expand voting options for people to vote from home. So all of your parents in Colorado get their ballots at home. You might even help them fill out their ballots or be a part of that. And we enacted that law 7 years ago, and now my organization at the national level is trying to advance that reform across the country. So we've been working this year alone, we've worked in we've been engaged with 38 different states, advancing this reform, trying to help them improve the process, just like we did in Colorado 7 years ago. And then prior to that, I actually I worked in elections for 15 years. But prior to becoming an election official 15 years ago, I also worked on college campuses in Iowa during the presidential election in 2004, helping to register and improve civic engagement for first-time voters that were 18 and 19 and 20. So I, at an early age, got engaged in this process. I've been passionate about voting and reform, and also trying to look at the world in a different way and trying to improve our communities and leave the world better than I found it. And my track of that has been voting, but that's been really my lifelong mission, is to improve this process for all. I'm also a mom, single mom. I have a 7 and 9-year-old. My daughter's been wanting to join Girl Scouts. We were sort of in the middle of that when the pandemic hit, so hopefully she'll get re-engaged in that now. And yeah, we live in Denver, and Stephanie's one of my best friends. So it was really a pleasure to write a book with one of my best friends.
Well, thank you, Amber. So my name is Stephanie, and I am a career attorney and lawyer. And I met Amber in right around 2013 when I was a lawyer for our former governor, John Hickenlooper. And some of you may have seen him a little bit in the news these days. He is currently running for what he hopes will be his next act, which will be to be a U.S. Senator. But I was his lawyer when he was governor. And at that point in time, we worked on some very important legislation that was around ballots and how you register to vote and participating in our elections. And it was in that realm that I met Amber. And following that, I've had a few roles as the head lawyer and also head executive for different education organizations. And it's been a real pleasure to be able to serve Colorado in a lot of different ways, both in the public sector for schools and the government, but then also in the private sector for companies and other individuals who need help from lawyers. So I know that's kind of complicated, but I also now I'm working with Amber. We just launched a big project that we're working on that will hopefully use elections and election reform to help advance women and girls. So we are continuing to try to do a lot of work that will help you girls as you continue to grow and seek your education and whatever it is that you want to do in your life. So know that we're working hard for you alongside Leanna and Amy and everyone else at Girl Scouts. I was a Girl Scout in El Paso, Texas, Troop 107. I will never forget. And learned a lot of great things, but I have to say, when I was a Girl Scout, we didn't have anything like the democracy patch or anything like that. So I'm so pleased that you have that now. But my personal favorite accomplishment was my horseback riding patch. So if any of you are involved in that, I wish you the best. Horseback riding is really fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. So now, I mean, the beauty of our Meet an Expert sessions is that we can get to talk about whatever girls are interested in. So I'm going to open up our chat box now. So please feel free to enter your questions for Stephanie and Amber into the chat box now. I'll go through and read them. And I guess I can kick things off by, can you tell us a little bit about what work you had planned for the, whatever you're working on for the last year and how things have changed in your career due to COVID-19?
Go ahead, Steph.
Wow. Well, I will focus this a little bit on our book because when Amber and I wrote this book, for those of you that don't know, we are currently celebrating this year the 100-year anniversary of women having the right to vote. And so Amber and I wanted to write a book about women voting and elections and what could we do in elections to make sure that more women would vote. So we initially wrote the book because we were really trying to honor that anniversary of the suffrage movement. So that's why our book, which you can see it there, has this flag which symbolizes suffrage, this sash. And I also have one here that I wanted to show you that Amber bought for me as a present one time, that I can actually wear, just like the suffragettes. But the way that it changed because of COVID was because we had no idea that actually what we talk about in our book would become ever more important, because we now needed different ways to vote because people couldn't show up in person. And so our work completely transformed. And as a result, Amber, for example, she probably spends 6 out of every 8 working hours in the day talking to various news television stations and everything, because everyone wants to know about exactly what we wrote about here, because it's all about how to make elections easier and more accessible. And I'll let Amber say more.
Yeah, we started writing this book in 2018, and we interviewed women in various states. We interviewed 2 different secretaries of state that are both women and elected for the book. And so we kind of spent 2019 really writing and formulating the plan for the book. And so we launched it January 30th of 2020. And I will tell you that our timing was tough. It was good on one hand. It's tough to launch a book right before a pandemic starts, because all of our in-person bookstore events and all those sorts of things that we had planned for 2020 were clearly got changed. So on the one hand, the timing was tough because of that. On the other, it was sort of perfect timing, because January 30th, we launched our book, with people started reading it, asking us lots of great questions about it. We started to see a movement around it, and then the pandemic hit. And so it became critically important to continue to get that message out. And we saw a lot of interest in the book. And then simultaneous to that, just personally, as many of you were probably online for school, my children went online at the same time that my work got exponentially busier. And I was working, usually on the low side, 12 hours a day. Usually that would go up to 16 hours, just because I was covering the whole country. So I'd start 6 a.m. calls on the East Coast, and that would usually go to really late in the night with Alaska and Hawaii, in the Pacific Coast states. So it's sort of interesting. I think that the timing kind of sometimes is everything, and our book being out there ahead of the pandemic, ahead of when states had to really adjust, is a big deal. Along with, honestly, this was supposed to be a really big year of celebrating women's suffrage. And so a lot of those big events that were planned and a lot of big things that were going to happen this year just couldn't happen with COVID, or had to be adjusted in a significant way. But I also think that speaks to how resilient women are, and women are good at adjusting, even in challenging situations. And that's certainly been the case this year.
Great. So we have some great questions coming in. So how did you come up with the idea of writing a book, and overall, what inspired you?
Well, I think that I'll start with the last part. I think we inspired each other to write this book. We were, Amber tells me for over the years, has told me a lot of different, very interesting things about elections and the administration of elections. And in advance of the 2018 election, probably around this very time, maybe a little bit before, we started noticing that it was I started noticing that it was very, very hard in some states for people to vote, mostly because of all of the bizarre timelines and requirements, just things that we did not have in Colorado. And we started looking at whether or not this impacted women. And we decided that it was really important to get this message out, because while women achieved the right to vote 100 years ago, so many women, based on their life circumstances, lack the opportunity to vote because it's not easy. And, we looked at all sorts of different statistics and reports that showed that inconvenience, which for those of you that may or may not know that word, it makes it mean if it's hard or if it's not easy, limits people's desire to vote. And so we wanted to make sure that in this election, 2020, that was on people's mind. And again, we had no idea that it would be so much more important because of the pandemic, not just for women, but for everybody. So that was our inspiration. And, we had a really good time doing it together.
And the one piece I would add is our kids were a big part of writing of the book. So we both have 7-year-olds and a 9 and 10 they're 9 and 10 at the time of the book. And they were always around, and we actually ended up asking them to write the foreword. So the foreword is the first part of the book, kind of introducing the book, and each of our kids wrote a paragraph for that foreword. And part of the reason that we wanted to do that, and the book is dedicated to our 4 kids too, because we want to leave them a better process and world than the way that we found it. And so it's that inspiration also came very much from their influence and their little minds and their faces and their inquiring questions, and all of that was a very big part of it.
Wow, that's was so beautifully put. So some questions, I'm going to flip-flop the order of these questions here because I think it'll lend to our conversation a little bit better. But who is your book? So the question that came in is your book aimed towards younger girls or adults? And I would say, to follow up, who is the audience for this book? Like, who did you write this book for? I mean, yeah.
Well, our book ends in the very back with a playbook, which is kind of the guide to how we think you could do better. And we direct it towards 3 different groups. One is elected officials and people who make policy. So your, congressmen and senators and governors and those people. The second group is to the people who actually run elections, like what Amber used to do. The people who are there counting your votes and deciding when how to print up your ballots and all of that. And then the third is to voters. And so that is the future you all and what you should expect. And so it's 3 different groups of people. And I think that's it. Amber, did I miss something?
No, I think the only thing I would add is that elections are the people's elections. So we really wanted to write a book that was that sort of brought everyone into the story of this in different ways, because elections are yours. They will be yours when you're voters. They're your parents now. Elections are something that is the people's, and that kind of gets forgotten by some politicians when they talk about it, but it is your vote. The election process is a very public event that the community needs to participate in. And so we wanted to really frame it in that way too. So there's a little bit for everyone in the book. And that includes adults, but I think it also includes certainly young people like you all to read about this, know about it, learn about it now, get involved at an early age. You can all be poll workers at 15 or 16 if you want to. So there's a lot of ways to get engaged in the voting process even prior to casting that first vote.
And I will say, like, throughout the book, there are stories of different women voters and also women who are running elections. And so there's a lot that everyone can identify with in terms of the book.
I love that. So this is a great question from Charlotte. So she asked, who's your biggest influence? And I would say with regard to writing a book, as well as just in your life, like in Girl Scouts, we talk a lot about the impact that our fellow troop mates and troop leaders can have on us. So who are some of the biggest influencers in your lives?
Steph, you want to go?
Sure. So I would say probably early on, my mother, and she continues to remain a very important influence in my life. She was also a lawyer and went to law school later in life. Um, but I would say I'm very much influenced by my peers and my friends. And those women that I'm inspired by doing great things like Amber, like Leanna, and others.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely my mom, and then my two grandmothers were, and my great aunt, all were poll workers. I remember my grandma Eleanor walking to her polling place because she never drove. So she would literally walk, 5 in the morning on election day and go be a poll worker. Everyone knew her in her precinct. My other grandma, same thing. And then my aunt Elsa, my great aunt Elsa, was actually a student with Ronald Reagan in his high school, a very small high school in Sterling, Illinois. I think there were only 18 of them, and she was in his class. And so when he then became president, she would write him lots of letters at the White House about all the things she thought he should be doing better. And so, really all four of those women were an early influence on me. My dad is a big part of the influence in my life as well. Was a lawyer, and then now a judge in Illinois, and he's certainly guided my perspective on public service. And then today, I agree with Stephanie, my peers, but also my children. My children are big influences in how I think about things in the future and all of that.
Wonderful. So Ivana and Allison ask, what are the hardest parts of writing a book?
The writing. It's very hard to sit there and write it so that it actually makes sense. Probably like when your teachers ask you to write a few sentences about what you read, sometimes you have that mental block at first that you just don't even know what to say. And then when you're writing a book, you have to do it over and over. And then you have to also read what you wrote over and over. And Amber and I did a lot of this work actually together. And so we would sit mostly at the dining room table in my house. Like Amber alluded to this earlier, and our kids would be running around and we would read out loud and write and find citations. And so it was a very, a process that had a lot of different parts to it. But I think the two biggest, if I had to say the two hardest parts, is first deciding what exactly you want to write and in what order. And then the second part is just the actual writing. It can be very hard.
Yeah, I agree. And then I would add the other thing, we were both, it's nerve-wracking, like once you kind of get through the process, and we had an editor help us with the book, help us edit, which was sort of an interesting experience. But it's nerve-wracking to kind of sign off and say, this is good, this is the way we want it, because it's our work. It was our work for over a year. We did it together, and it's nerve-wracking to kind of hit send on the approval email for it to then go get published.
Very cool. Heather and Kelly ask, who are some of your favorite authors?
Go for it, Amber.
Ooh, that's a good question. So as a young person, I really enjoyed basically two types of books. The sort of romantic classics, I guess is a good way to say that. And then I loved history books, like about different leaders that had led and all of that. So I would say, I think at that time, probably Emily Bronte was my favorite to read. And then now I've, gosh, I don't know. Lately I've been reading a lot of autobiographies. So I really enjoyed reading Michelle Obama's book. I have read various, I'm very into personal stories. So a lot of what I read is autobiographical, which is interesting. And then I also kind of really, I've been really liking, I wouldn't call it inspirational, but a lot of kind of inspirational books that whether it be are visionary or help improve the work I do, the organization, some of those. So different authors that like different topics around those issues. I'm trying to decide which one is my favorite. Go ahead, Steph, and then I'll.
Well, when I was younger, I loved Judy Blume, and I loved books about girls coming of age. When I got more into high school and college, I loved books about history and government. Anything that was a biography about any person in history or government, I loved it. My favorite fiction authors are probably Pat Conroy and John Irving. Very different, but just amazingly character-driven, plot-thicking. Currently, I'm reading 2 books. They're right here with me. One is called First, and it is about Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the first woman Supreme Court Justice. It is amazing, but the other amazing thing about Sandra Day O'Connor is she's also from El Paso, Texas, where I'm from, and went to school there. So I feel bonded to her. And then I'm also reading this other book, which is totally inappropriate for young girls, but it's a New York Times bestseller called Untamed, and it's about, a woman's life, and she's an excellent writer. And so that is what I'm currently enjoying.
And here's
reading with my kids because they're starting to read, 5th grade. My daughter's reading some pretty fun books.
Yeah, and here's what I'm reading right now. Is called The Likeability Trap, and it's by Alicia Menendez, she's an anchor on MSNBC. And this book is actually a lot about what women face in the workforce or in politics. And, so she kind of talks about this likability piece that we tend to get stuck on. But she's really good, and she's an anchor on TV. So she's kind of a fun one to watch as well.
Very cool. I might have to go check out some of those books. So I don't want to pronounce her name wrong, but Jaisha asked, are there any pictures in your book?
Yes, there are.
Well,
yours.
There's one thing we tried to do in our book was make it very relevant, because nowadays people do so much on Twitter and, other social media. So we have images of Twitter in here. We have some maps. We did not include, and then, pictures that came along with that. We didn't include, we thought about including some pictures of like suffragettes or even ourselves or some of the women that we reference in here, but we didn't do that. Maybe we will on the next round.
Yeah, there's a lot of maps because we tried to tell a story with the election reform.
In fact, I think Amber's son said that was his favorite part of the book, didn't he? Or did
he wrote that in the foreword that he likes the book because there's
he said, my mama works so hard. I love my mama so much. I can't wait to read the book she wrote with my friend Marcus's mom, Miss Stephanie. They did it together, and I think that is really cool. It's like when Marcus and I play baseball together. We are a team. And also there are really cool maps in the book. I like the maps.
And one of the maps, it actually shows what women's suffrage looked like. So 100 years ago was when the 19th Amendment was ratified. So that gave women across the country. But 26 years prior to that, Colorado passed women's suffrage in Colorado first. And what was interesting about women getting the right to vote is that Western states actually were the first states to enfranchise women. And that's actually very similar to what Western states have led on this year, which we talk about in our book, to make it easier for voters. It's actually easier to vote in Western states like Colorado than it is on the eastern side of the country. And that's very similar to the same situation that was 100 years ago.
I'm so glad you pointed that out. I mean, as I've learned more about the women's suffrage movement this year than I have, of course, in the rest of my life, that is something that I've just find so interesting about the Western side of our country and mail-in ballots and giving women the right to vote. So thank you for pointing that out. Heather and Kelly ask, do you have another book coming out?
Sure. We haven't started working on our next book yet, but we have often talked about what it should be. And we can't give you a spoiler, but we've also even talked about actually making a book for kids and for teens. So stay tuned. We have to see where these next few months take us, but I have no doubt we will be working on something else together.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think from the beginning, we've talked extensively about a book designed for kids to engage kids early on in civics and learning about it. So I'm definitely excited to look to future projects on all fronts.
I love that. Well, if you ever want some thoughts from girls about what they're looking for, you know, Girl Scouts are a great audience.
Yeah, the interesting thing also about writing a book about an area of policy and law that is so rapidly changing is that this book is really already out of date. And so, and it's only been in publication less than a year. So we have some work to do after this next election to even just update this. And then, you know, think about how we evolve it. So stay tuned.
Great. So some more questions coming in. How much time, and maybe you can just expand upon this, but somebody asked how much time has passed between you finishing the book and actually publishing it and releasing it? And maybe can you tell us even more just about like the timeline of writing a book and what that looks like?
Yeah, you know, so to Stephanie's point of the different changes that have happened this year, we actually had a couple of states, partly because the organization that I run at Vote at Home, we were trying to work on legislation around the country last year. And we actually got some legislation passed literally from the time that we finalized the manuscript to sort of when it was with the editor, and we made changes. So that process takes a while. We also, in our process, and Stephanie can talk more about this, I'm sure, but we really wanted to get feedback from our friends and our peers and other experts that we know. So we shared the manuscript and asked for feedback, and we gave them time to provide it. And that was a really important aspect of this for us, to get that feedback and be very thoughtful about how we incorporated that feedback into the manuscript before we published.
Yes, because lawyers like to write and have to write a lot. We asked a lot of lawyers for their opinion on our manuscript. But, you know, from the time that we decided to write the book to when we actually had a manuscript was about a year. And that's actually an incredibly short period of time and actually really abnormal. And we did that because we wanted to have it out in advance of this election next Tuesday and in honor of the women's suffrage movement. So it was a Herculean effort to get that done. And you know, that's, you know, our book is not long, and that was also by design, but it also probably could have been a little bit longer if we had had more time. And so I hope that answers the question. And then there was a subpart to that about the involvement in Girl Scouts.
Yeah, so the question also came in, how are you still involved in Girl Scouts?
So I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to be a recipient of the Women of Distinction Award through Girl Scouts. So that brought me back connected to the world of Girl Scouts, and have been able to attend that event and sponsor some other women for that award throughout the years. of course, now I'm even more connected because Leanna Clark has taken the role, and she's a friend of mine and Amber's both. I do have a daughter who is of age to be in Girl Scouts, and she has not made that yet one of her activities, but we'll see if we can't get her in.
Yeah, and same for me. My daughter is definitely interested. There hasn't been a troop at her school. So we've been kind of trying to figure out where she would fit in and engage and all of that. And I want to revisit that with her because she's definitely interested. And yeah, that's certainly exciting. And then my son has sort of dabbled with talking about Boy Scouts, but I don't know if he'll ultimately do that. He hasn't done that yet. So.
Oh, and importantly, I am always attached to Girl Scouts through Thin Mints,
Yes.
the cookie,
Big
which is the
Girls.
most important, one of the most important things I look forward to annually.
Great. Well, cookie season is coming up real quick, so get your stomachs ready. So Lourdes, I don't know maybe if you can answer this, but Lourdes asked, how do you make copies of a book? So did you get to learn anything about the actual process of like physically producing books on a large scale through actually writing a book?
Yeah, so I can talk a little. So we have a publisher. So we used, and we actually wanted to use a local Colorado company. So our books are printed and made in Colorado. And then the interesting thing about Amazon now is with Amazon, they actually, just like so many of the other things they do, they have their own printing and publishing arm of Amazon. So when you get a book published in Amazon, when you click order on Amazon, it's not actually coming from the vendor in Colorado that we do. Amazon actually prints that book on demand through their printing presses. And then they also have the Kindle version, so you can kind of get it through there. So it's sort of interesting because it used to be kind of prior to Amazon that bookstores, and this is usually what bookstores do, is they order a certain quantity and they keep that on, and then if they need to reorder, they'll do that. Amazon kind of opened up a whole different way to do this that allows this sort of more on-demand type of scenario. And then our vendor being local, it makes it pretty easy to get additional copies printed.
Very cool. That's super interesting. So a question came in, did you find any barriers in writing and getting your book published because you are women?
I think that we didn't in getting it published because we chose a local publisher and we had a massively expedited timeline. I'm not sure what barriers we would have seen had we gone with a national publisher. The barriers may have been bigger because we weren't known authors at that time. But I don't think that we saw barriers necessarily in writing. Amber, do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, I don't think we faced barriers. I don't know how it would have been if we would have gone with a larger publisher. That when you sign on with a larger publisher, you do lose, at least according to a lot of authors, you lose a little bit of creative control. So like in our case, they might have wanted to change some of the way that we were approaching the book. And so that would have been challenging if we would have done that, but I don't think we faced any barriers necessarily other than time.
Time and the fact that we both had other full-time jobs. So that was even more of a time problem.
Yeah.
Sure. So I have a question, and that is, what did you want to be when you grow up? When you were a girl, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I mean, for me, that is so easy. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to be a lawyer. I don't think I knew I would like business as much as I have figured that out. But I loved helping people and using my law degree to help people.
Yeah, I for a long time wanted to be a lawyer, and part of the reason for that is my dad was a lawyer and he became a judge. So I kind of had this vision of that. I ended up going to grad school and really loved my work from a graduate perspective in London. And then that I still was sort of thinking about law school, but I started progressing significantly with elections and sort of down that track and decided it wasn't something that I needed to do. And then the other thing I really wanted to do was be a pilot. And I still am convinced I will get a pilot's license someday. But I've always been fascinated by flying. I think astronauts are incredible. So I've, still want to do that, not necessarily as a career, but would like to get a pilot's license.
Very cool. So I'll make a note. So we're approaching the end of our time together. So if anyone has any remaining questions, please enter them into the chat box now. But I would like to ask the question, I mean, what is one piece of advice you can give girls today?
Amber, take it away.
Have courage and be kind. And the reason I say that, my mom said that to me when I was growing up. It's a sort of our motto as a family with my kids, and have courage and be kind. And I think is one way that we can all create a better community and world is to do those two things in a better way.
I would say live in your integrity, which means oftentimes doing the right thing when it's unpopular or behind the scenes. And surround yourself by a lot of really great women and girls who can advocate for you, who can be there for you when you're falling on hard times, who can help remind you that you're strong and you're smart and you're capable, and who can, when you get older, make calls on your behalf or help you write a paper or do whatever it is that girls do together. So you all are taking the very first step by being a part of Girl Scouts. And I would say you should find your Girl Scouts, whatever that looks like, at every phase in your life.
I love both of those pieces of advice, or all of those, more than one piece.
Amy, I forgot to say before we get too far down the road that Amber and I are donating a book to each one of you girls who have participated tonight. So you will each get a book through Girl Scouts of Colorado. So hopefully if you take the time to read it or you have any feedback, you can send us some questions maybe, or you can tell us what you think. If it's horrible, find a way to say it nicely. We still do have feelings.
That is so generous and kind of you. I'll reach out to everyone on the webinar today to get your mailing addresses so that we make sure we send them to the right place. Thank you so much. Martha entered into the chat box that she's been waiting on a copy from her local library. So she's going to be super excited to get her copy in the mail. Thank you both so much.
Of course.
And just, I mean, so one question came in, if you could go back in time and tell your younger self one thing, what would that be?
Wow. Amber?
I know, I was just contemplating that. So I think one thing that I would have appreciated knowing more about and maybe focusing on more as a younger girl was that not to be so hard on myself, and that you actually can learn more from failures or difficult situations than victories or wins. And I wish I would have paid more attention to how I felt if I went through a difficult time, or how I felt if there was if I didn't win something or I didn't get an A on a paper versus a C. If I would have paid more attention to the lessons learned from that, I think I would have preferred to know that earlier on. So yeah, I think that would be it.
Mine probably would have been something like, you don't have to wear pantyhose, because that was a requirement when we were growing up, like in professional life, you had to wear pantyhose. I would say, don't worry about wearing your pantyhose. But in all honesty, I'd probably say, believe in yourself and surround yourself by others who do as well. And I know that sounds easier said than done, but I think sometimes going to that book that Amber's reading that I don't know anything about, but I assume it's about wanting to surround yourself or do things that make you liked by others, but maybe don't actually fulfill who you are or what you believe in. And so focus on what you believe in and others who believe in you, and you don't have to wear pantyhose unless you want to.
I love all of that. So I was just thinking through things. I've closed our chat box now, so it is private again. So I'm going to ask everyone to just enter your mailing address for your copy of When Women Vote into the chat box. I'll then save the chat box and we can send them out from there. I think it'll be a little bit smoother than having to email everyone and ask you for your address. But like I said, it is private, so your mailing address will just come in back to me. Or you can also, you can enter your full name and we can check it in our. So we are, again, approaching the end of our time together today. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So I think we will close things out with our question that we ask all of our experts on our Meet an Expert webinar series. And that looming huge question is, what is your favorite Girl Scout cookie?
That's easy. Thin Mints, and I really like them to be cold, so in the freezer.
You know, I am right there too. Thin Mints, and I freeze them the minute that I get them. No surprise, Amber and I like the same cookie.
Wonderful. Well, I would never turn down a frozen Thin Mint either. So good choices. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And thank you to all the Girl Scouts who were able to participate. I know we have Girl Scouts in Colorado and even a few from some other states. I think there was a Texas and maybe someone from New York joining us. So thank you to everybody. I know I learned a lot. I hope you learned a lot as well. We will post our recording again to our Meet an Expert YouTube playlist. And I'll probably be sending out a follow-up email as well. And don't forget, you can also get your Girl Scouts of Colorado Meet an Expert patch through our online shop. So thank you all so much. Amber and Stephanie, I just really can't thank you enough for joining us and telling us all about your lives and your experience and answering all these wonderful questions from Girl Scouts. So thanks everybody and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
You.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.